Hi, welcome to the Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at lruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Today, my guest is one of my all-time favorites, Rob Mack. He's an Ivy League-educated positive psychology expert, celebrity happiness coach, executive coach, and author of Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment. Rob holds a very rare degree only offered by the University of Pennsylvania, a master's degree in applied positive psychology. He's one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between happiness and success. His work has been endorsed by Oprah, Vanessa Williams, and many others, and he's been seen all over the place, from Good Morning America, The Today Show, Access Hollywood, to publications like Cosmopolitan, Glamour, Health, GQ, and more. Visit CoachRobMack.com to learn more about his work, and I hope you enjoy the show. Oh, Rob, one of my favorites. How you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Every time I talk to you, I seem to be doing really well, and I think it has to do with the fact that you and I are talking.
I love that. Well, you know, we've done a few interviews in the past. We've talked about some of the statistics around happiness. I'm going to get into a couple of those today, but I sort of wanted to jump around the map on a bunch of things having to do with happiness. But I guess I just want to start out for the people that don't know your work or who you are. Let's talk a little bit about this Master's of Applied Positive Psychology. You got very rare degree, University of Pennsylvania. They're the only people that offer it. And let's go through some of those main points. I forget if it's 75,000 or 80, but there's some things people are interested in about, like, you know, statistics about how much you make and the happiness. So can you just sort of run through some of the top ones?
Absolutely. So, you know, this is the way I usually simplify it, is that, you know, success doesn't generally and consistently lead to happiness, right? And so lots of the things that we think of as successful life conditions or circumstances don't actually make you lastingly, meaningfully, and abidingly happy, right? And so what that means is that, you know, believe it or not, as you get older, you don't become sadder. You actually become, for the most part, a little happier. You experience fewer highs, but you also experience a lot fewer lows. And so there's a sort of emotional regulation thing that kind of happens as you get older. We sometimes think that education will make you happy or happier. Tends not to be the case for the most part. We also think that marriage, I think most of us have been disabused of that idea, but we think marriage or long-term relationships will make us happier. And we found that that tends not to be the case at all, that for the most part, you get a small bump in your happiness when you first get married during that sort of honeymoon phase. And then you quickly return to your baseline level. Sometimes you dip way below that. Kids, same deal, right? Kids don't end up making you happier. In fact, the first kid makes you less happy. The second kid makes you statistically, significantly less happy. And your baseline level or your happiness doesn't return to its baseline level usually until the kids leave the house. That could be 18 and that could be 40 years of age. Yes.
That's a long run to wait.
That's right. Exactly. And same deal with money, right? We often think money. Now, money can certainly make your misery more comfortable. And if you're living below a level of subsistence, so like you said, $75,000 or $80,000 a year, depending where you are, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, additional dollars, for the most part, don't considerably add to your happiness. And you actually start to experience the diminishing marginal utility of the dollar, which means you get less happiness bang for your buck. Right. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's like most of what we think of in terms of success doesn't lead to happiness. Even health, that includes health. So we found really no correlation between objective health and happiness. Surprisingly enough, there is a link between subjective health, meaning your experience or how you sort of perceive or experience your health, and happiness. Right. So that's the first side, is that essentially, you know, by and large, successful life outcomes and conditions don't really lead to the lasting and meaningful and abiding happiness that you're after. Now, the other side of that is that, interestingly enough, not only does success not lead to happiness, but happiness actually does lead to success, right? So if there ever was a cheat code or a master key to experiencing increasingly authentic and effortless success, it would be happiness. And so what do we mean by that? Well, happy people live longer, 6 to 7 years longer than their unhappy counterparts, at least sometimes as many as 11 years longer or more. They experience better health as they live longer. Believe it or not, they also tend to take better care of themselves. because we often think people that are happy are probably pretty ignorant, and that ignorance is bliss. But actually, interestingly enough, that people that are happy tend to be optimistic, and in their optimism, they seek out medical care if and when they need it. The other piece of it is that happy people tend to get married earlier, stay married longer, and are happier in all the relationships, whether they're married or not, because it's not about marriage, obviously. It's about love and happiness. They make about it's about $600,000 to $700,000 more on average than their unhappy peers or counterparts. And so really, when you look at it, happiness is not only the greatest success, it's the reason we want success, but happiness also increases the likelihood and the probability of you experiencing successful life outcomes in practically every and any area of your life.
It's so fascinating. I was sort of Googling around at some happiness research, and something out of Harvard said that close relationships, more than money or fame, are what keep people happy throughout their lives.
That's right. That's right. And sometimes we hear that and we kind of think of, most of us, when we think of relationships, we think of romantic relationships first and foremost. But no, social connections. And you don't have to have a whole lot of social connection or social support. But it's sort of the depth of those social connections. Can you trust those folks? Can you depend on those folks? Can they depend on you? Do they trust you? But yeah, more than anything else, from a positive psychology perspective, sort of the depth and sort of the richness of your social life and your social connections sort of predicts happiness over and above most other things.
I was reading a little bit, some studies out of Denmark, which, Nordic countries are considered the happiest in the world, as you know. And they're saying that loneliness is the most burdensome condition for adults over 50. And then I heard something from my mother yesterday, who my stepfather is Danish. And she was saying that, and this blew my mind. It actually kind of brought me to tears. I thought it was so sweet. So when you live in Denmark, if you're old and you live alone, they know who you are and they call you every morning at 8 a.m. to check in on you. I just think that's the sweetest thing in the world. I like, as far as loneliness goes, and that's just what they do. That's their protocol. That's just what happens. You're old and alone. They know who you are. You get a call at 8 a.m. every day.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, no wonder they're happy paying their taxes over there. Some really
yes.
interesting things going on. What a caring community type of thing, isn't it?
It's absolutely true.
Yeah, but go ahead. And I want to just expand on loneliness, because I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of that past couple of years.
Yeah, it's such a great point that you make. And, of course, there's something going on there with perceptions and beliefs around age as well, right? So in the States here, we have a culture that generally sort of prioritizes youth, right? Or at least believes that there's something, and there is something incredibly special and extraordinary about being young. But there's also something extraordinary and special about being or growing older, right? There's often a wisdom that develops. We know that for the most part, people tend to trend sort of positively in the direction of happiness and more happiness, right? And so there's an age thing going on there. But in terms of the sort of loneliness point you're making, it's a profound one. It's like we live in an age of anxiety and an age of loneliness, despite being better connected than we've ever been, at least technologically. And yet people don't feel that. And so there's a difference sort of course, between aloneness and loneliness. And we often confound those two things. Aloneness is the objective experience of just being alone by yourself somewhere. Loneliness is the subjective experience of that aloneness. And so, lots of us are alone, but we don't feel lonely. And a lot of us feel lonely, but we're not alone, right? And so there's
which to me is sort of the worst. I think probably everyone listening has experienced this. That if you've been in kind of a yucky relationship of any kind, and you're with that person, and you're you're lonely, even though you're there, and that's even more lonely than being fucking alone. It just feels even 10 times worse, I think.
That's right. When you're with a partner, and you're in a crowd, and you've got family and friends around, and you feel extraordinarily lonely. That's for sure. Because then. And so you're right. It's both a challenge and opportunity. So the challenge, of course, is you're well, how can I possibly feel alone in a crowd of family or friends or loving people? And so it can be extraordinarily frustrating, because it's kind of like being infinitely rich on the outside, but feeling really bankrupt inside, right? And so now the opportunity there, of course, is that, it allows you to come to a recognition and a realization that changing your outer or external conditions or circumstances, or inviting more people into your life may not solve the unhappiness and the loneliness that you feel on the inside. And so then in that case, you've kind of got to go directly to the source to it, and for it, which is yourself, right? So there's some thoughts there, and there's a story there, and there's a thought system there that is, allowing you to think things, or encouraging you to think things, or seducing you into thinking things that are contributing or even creating the lonely experiences or feelings that you're having on a consistent basis, right? And so that's kind of where the rubber hits the road, is that, you want to sort of address that at a causal level and not try to address it at the symptomatic level. And sometimes when you're surrounded by a ton of people but still feel lonely, you have that recognition or realization more quickly than the folks that are, essentially devoid of any social connections.
I know you're a fan of philosophy. Obviously, so am I.
Yes.
And a lot of ancient Greek philosophers have had wonderful things to say about happiness that, you and I agree with, like happiness depends upon ourselves and, things like this from Aristotle and Plato. And then occasionally you have a downer thrown in there. Like I was looking at John Stuart Mill. He said, I have learned to seek my happiness by limiting my desires rather than in attempting to satisfy them. Now, I see that as being very interesting, but also it seems a little downery, right? Like this notion of, well, just, don't have any expectation. Like just, it's tough for us. We seek things, we want things, we want to improve. And I think what I hear in that, or the problem I hear in that, is when you're thinking about this stuff on your own, you're like, this is the conundrum. You think, I don't want to be happy for what I have now because I don't want the universe or God or whatever to think I'm okay with that. I don't want to just accept this that I have now. Yeah, it's good, but I don't want to just be content. You get what I'm saying?
Totally. This used to drive me up the wall. It would drive me nuts, particularly expressions like that. And I would go back and forth. I'd go to the one end when it was like, just intend and visualize and manifest anything you wanted. I would totally lean into that. And there were other moments when I sometimes wouldn't be able to accomplish or manifest or attract what I wanted, or I did manifest or attract what I wanted, but it didn't satisfy me. And so that I leaned back into the quotes like John Stuart Mill. And what I found is that actually, if you go deep enough into any of these teachings, I think you find that they're mostly saying the same thing. And so the way I would say it, and I think John Stuart Mill is absolutely correct, and positive psychology would support that to a large extent, which is that, fulfilling your desires is not the way to find fulfillment. Okay. We call it a hedonic treadmill, but it's like, no matter what you accomplish, achieve, or acquire, you can clearly see it's not going to guarantee happiness for you. Everything wears off, everything rusts away, right? Everything wears out. There's that. But also you have a little bit of an expectation hangover. It's like nothing and nobody delivers as much happiness for as long as you desire, expect that it will. Right. And so the way I kind of see it is, and if you notice, even when you fulfill a desire, any kind of desire, you can see that that's true, that it wears off pretty quickly and that it doesn't last as long as you like. And sometimes the happiness isn't intense as you want either. And then before long, as soon as you've fulfilled one desire, another new desire crops up. And no matter what problem you solve over here, a finance problem, a relationship problem, another problem pops up over there, health problem, whatever. And so if your recipe or formula for trying to achieve happiness is about fulfilling all your desires, it's hopeless. Desire is bottomless. It's endless. You never get to the end of the internet and you never get to the end of desire, right? I mean, they're just thoughts. Desires are just thoughts that proliferate. They just, continue to replicate and reproduce. And so a much better approach, I think, and I'm open to being wrong, is instead of optimizing for fulfilling all of the desires that crop up and pop up in the course of a life, instead of that, go to the very root desire that you have, that we all have, which is happiness. It's like the only reason you want to achieve, accomplish, or acquire anything is because you think you'll feel better for having achieved, accomplished, or acquired it, right? That better feeling I call happiness. And I would love if it just lasted, as long as humanly possible, and lasted even if I wasn't satisfying all my desires. And that's generally possible. I think that we all find there are moments when we can sort of dive into this pool or this wellspring of happiness within us, or peace or joy or love. And what's interesting about it is that according to positive psychology, but also according to most of our lives, if we look closely enough, when you prioritize happiness first and foremost, it leads you to experience and to fulfill all these other dreams, goals, and desires that you have in a much less effortful, much less painful way. And sometimes it seems like a miracle. Things kind of seem to fall out of thin air. And so I would say that, these teachers that often seem like they're teaching different things are ultimately saying pretty much the same thing, which is that if you can find peace or happiness or joy within yourself here and now, despite what you have or haven't accomplished or acquired, you'll find that you're happy and you're at peace and you're self-loving, which is the point of all that stuff anyway. But not just that, you tend to find that all the other stuff finds its way to you much more easily and enjoyably.
Your book is great, Happiness from the Inside Out, and there's some tips in there, I think, sort of in drawing back to basics here a bit. Let's, talk about the section where you mentioned about, how language, it either empowers us or disempowers us. What are the kind of things we're saying? I'll run through a few of them and then you can address them. But, you talked about the should and shouldn't have to, right? The need to, I need to, or but, or the whole don't forget instead of, remember, right? All the sort of opposites of this, or I can't versus like, how do you know you can, or how do you know they can't, right? So let's talk about language a little bit, because I think people can start there, right? By being aware of being aware of how they're speaking about themselves and other people and things.
Absolutely. It's interesting. We often think that language is used to describe the world, but it's actually used also to inform us and to inform our perceptions and our experience of the world and of ourselves and of each other, right? And so language is actually extraordinarily powerful. And if you can see it as a tool, not just to describe the world, but to also inform you and support you and others in creating the kind of world that you want to create, you'll find that you can get a lot more leverage out of language, right? And so for me, one of the ways I think about that is, how can I tell an equally true, if not even more truthful story based that's also better feeling, right? So in other words, instead of vetting thoughts and words based on whether or not they're true, I found that if you vet them also based on whether or not they support you in achieving what you want to achieve or experiencing what you want to experience, or support others in achieving or experiencing what they want to achieve and experience, you can get so much more and better use out of language, right? And so when we talk about language, we're of course talking about the self-talk, the talk and the conversations we have with ourselves, but also with other people. And so I think a lot of us I know I certainly did, fall into the trap of focusing on and thinking about and talking about things simply because they were true, and talking about them in a way that was not supportive, that was extraordinarily frustrating, anxiety-provoking, and eventually led to an experience of like helplessness or hopelessness. And so I think we can do better than that. And I think we can enjoy our lives and each other and the world a whole lot more. And we can also create a much better world for ourselves and each other by just leaning into a much more productive and profitable and even pleasurable use of language.
Even sort of like, oh, I have to go do that versus like, I get to go do that, or I'm going to go do that, versus the have to, this like forced sort of connotation there.
Yeah, that's right. And if you look at it, I mean, and that's the beautiful thing about it, is that if you look really closely and deeply, you can see that I get to is actually more true. There are very few things that you actually have to do. You don't have to pay your bills. Yeah, there are going to be consequences. You don't have to go to work. Yeah, there are going to be consequences. It's not a have to. It's that you get to, quite literally. And, just wait long enough. And often in life, the tables will turn and you don't have a job. And the last thing you want to do is not be at a job, even if you don't hate, even if you hate the job. It's like, sometimes it's a lot harder being without a job than it's being with a job, And so in any case, the point is, yes, how can we use language in a way that supports us? And I'm a firm believer, and I feel like this is pretty obvious. It's like life is an unearned, undeserved gift. Like we didn't do anything to deserve it. Yet we have it. We have this incredible life, right? And sometimes life is very hard, but it was a gift nonetheless. And that means that everything that comes with life, that comes in life, is a gift too. It's also an unearned gift, right? It's like you were born with, a functioning body, and a heart, and lungs, and a brain, and parents, even if they weren't the best parents, even if they were terrible parents. It's like all a gift sometimes it's poorly wrapped, but it's all gift. And so a huge piece around this language part is really about gratitude and appreciation. It's not only a much more enjoyable experience to have, gratitude and appreciation, but it also does a whole lot for you, particularly if you care about success and you care about love, and you care about making more money, and you care about being healthy, because it's sort of conducive to all those things.
So in my experience, super happy people usually don't hang out with a bunch of negative downers, right? So, and vice versa, right? Listen, if you're a negative downer, you'd probably be hanging out with a bunch of them. So on that note, someone's moving towards happiness. They're getting it together with their thoughts. They're starting to see how they're creating their own reality in certain ways they'd like to change for the better. And they start to notice that everyone around them is a downer now, right? It's classic. None of their friends are going with them on this train, right? And they're like, oh man. And it's just even more glaringly obvious to them. I get this a lot with clients because they're starting to look at their friends going, oh man, I don't know. So on that note, okay, like if it's a family member and you're like, okay, I got to see this person once a year or whatever, it's not a big deal. But if it's a close friend or a group of friends and they're a bunch of downers, whatever, maybe they're jealous, competitive, who cares? Let's just call them a bunch of garbage. And you've realized this now because you've changed and you can't bring them along with you somehow. Maybe you've tried to live by example or impart wisdom and it just doesn't work. What kind of wisdom can you impart with those people on how to maybe navigate edging out without being like, hey, you're all a bunch of negative dickheads. See you later. Because, that's what you really like to say probably. So how do you navigate that? How would you tell someone to either slow fade or do you address it? That's a tough one to address, especially when you might have been that water cooler talker person. You're moved out of it now. You're different. And then you don't want to come back and be preachy, right? They're like, oh, look who just decided to change and thinks I'm crap now. Let's talk about this kind of problem that people have sometimes.
Well, you nailed it, Elle. I mean, gosh, I love this conversation with you so much. It's like if you're complaining about the negative people or talking about how negative people are, you're negative. And that makes you negative. It's like, if, to fight ignorance is ignorance, right? That's a problem. It's like to fight unconsciousness is unconsciousness. It's like, hello. So the
only way to fight ignorance is just throwing a library at somebody. I mean, that's all you
Yeah, exactly. Right. Totally. So there's that piece. It's like, so what I found, and, again, I think there's probably as many different approaches as there are people, but I have found that I can show you better than I can tell you. And I like to be and live as much as a living example, like teach through my living, shining example. And I want to do that as much as humanly possible. And sometimes words will come to mind and I'll share the words. But I have found that generally speaking, sharing your thoughts about why negativity is bad with people who are negative generally doesn't go over very well. And you just end up sounding negative yourself. And so instead of that, I found that I'm better off staying rooted and grounded and centered in my own happiness and peace and positivity. And if and when the words come to mind, I will, share them with the other person. But I've generally found that that's probably not the best use of my words or my time or my energy. For the most part, if people aren't really vibing with you and they're not aligned with you, just give them time. Usually those folks will either get up to speed or they kind of get out of the way or they just kind of find themselves out of your life. And that doesn't mean that you have to stop loving them. Like I think a lot of us think that just because someone isn't or we're not staying in touch with somebody as consistently or in the same way that we did before, that we don't love them or we can't love them or they don't love us. But sometimes you can love people better from a distance. You can have a much healthier, happier kind of love and send them much more positive, peaceful, harmonious vibes from a distance than when you're up close and personal and all the intimate details of their lives and their conversations and all the gossip and whatnot. So I'd say that, first of all, teach through your living, shining example. So be the change that you want to see in the others. Your presence is more powerful and or absence is more powerful than the words that you often want to speak. I mean, giving people unsolicited advice is generally not good idea, right? It's like the one thing that's freely given and never taken is unsolicited advice. Exactly. It's like, unless people are asking for it, it's falling in deaf ears. And once they are asking for it, what's the point of sharing it, right? It's like they already are clear about it. So I would just say, so those are the first two pieces, like be the change. The second is let your presence teach, right? And then I think thirdly, if you are going to share some words or you want to share some words, you want to address it through language. I love the acronym THINK. It's like before I speak, think. And think basically means how can I say what I'm about to say in a way that's T, just as true as I was originally going to share, but even possibly more true. H, helpful. So how can I say it in a way that's even more helpful than the way I was going to originally say it? I, inspiring. So how can I say it in an inspiring way, not in a way that's discouraging or demotivating or is going to disrupt a positive relationship? And then K, kind, right? So again, it goes back to how can I say this in a way that's true, but better feeling, right? And one way to do that is instead of like digging into the past and judging of all these examples of where they did it wrong, you stay out of the past, you stay focused on the present and the future. You don't attack character, right? You make it about the behavior and not about the actual actor, right? So you make it about the behavior and not the actual character. And then more than that, when you talk or speak to the behavior, you're speaking to the desirable behavior that you want to continue to feed and fuel, not the undesirable behavior that you're trying to extinguish. So instead of saying something like, I hate you, you suck, you're a negative Nelly, you say, I've so deeply enjoyed connecting with you, particularly when we're talking about things that we love and that are fun and that are uplifting. And I just got to tell you, every time we connect in that way, I feel so uplifted. I feel so inspired. It just brings such joy into my heart. And I want you to know I am always here to connect with you, especially in that way. I feel like that's when you get the best out of me. I feel like that's when I get the best out of you. And I just see you accomplishing, achieving, acquiring all that you want to achieve, accomplish, and acquire. And I want to do everything humanly possible to support you in that, encourage you in that, and we can have a conversation about how we can get aligned in that way, right? But there's it's just off the cuff. But the idea is you can always say,
I love that. It's really that is really a positive turnaround on the whole conversation. Yeah,
right. So that's the idea.
Another thing I was thinking is for the ones that are the tough nuts to crack or might never crack. If you're in a conversation and someone's going on a water cooler type of rant or something, sometimes I'll just say, hey, you know what, just for the hell of it, I we're talking about all this stuff we hate or don't like or whatever. What do you want? Hey, what would you like to have to happen there? And if you ask a bunch of those types of questions, they accidentally get into a positive vibration. You're kind of tricking them. And then the other one too is, especially with parents, I think, or grandparents, and, people that are kind of set in their ways, maybe so to speak, and people feel like, oh God, I got to talk to my dad or whatever. I feel like one of the best ways to get out of the boring, like, well, yeah, went down to the doctor and, the whole kind of those conversations with older people, not all of them, but is to ask your parents and ask people like that about their lives. I do this all the time. And I find it really interesting because I learned so much about my parent or whoever it is that I didn't know. But generally people do like to reminisce and talk about their good times, even if it's just something like, hey, you know what? I never even asked you, what did you major in college? Right? Let's just say someone says like sociology. Oh, hey, why did you choose that? Or where'd you go? You're reminiscing about the past, or they're talking about things that are off of the problems of today. That can even kind of accidentally, but like get them into a different vibration. And it certainly is a different conversation and way more pleasant than the one you were probably in.
Brilliant. Oh, that's brilliant. I love it. I completely agree. And it's interesting how much people do love to reminisce. And if you actually are really curious and you stay curious and you allow it to be innocent and non-judgmental, you'll find that people will naturally gravitate. Most of us want to feel good. I'd say that all of us want to feel good, really down deep inside. And so, sometimes you just have to be a little artful and a little skillful about the questions that you ask. That one that you just introduced is just powerful and incredible. Also, we've talked a little bit before about motivational interviewing, and like, it's also a great technique. It doesn't need to be formal, but essentially you're helping people identify their greatest desire on one hand, their greatest fear on the other. And then you lean into that and you let them do a little bit of that venting and sharing there. And then you begin to sort of build this kind of golden bridge back to more of a solution-oriented conversation, not where you're preaching at them and not even where you're giving them answers, but where you're asking really powerful, open-ended questions that are leaning in a direction that's increasingly supportive. Right. But the whole key there is like, you don't want to resist the resistance. Right. And so you want to lean into the path of least resistance in those kind of conversations, which means doing what people who have taken improv classes know to do well, which is yes. And it's like, just meet what they're saying with yes. And what about this other thing? Have you thought about that? Or do you remember an experience in the past that was any different from that? Like, do you remember anything that, inspired you in a different way, or that motivated you in a different way? Or right, but the idea, it's always yes and so to resist resistance or to fight negativity with negativity, or complain about the complainers, or to judge the judgy people is really not a great path. You become what you fight, right?
Yeah, it's like, God, I hate complainers. They're terrible. Yeah. It's just like the classic.
Exactly.
Or like, oh,
Totally.
All generalizations are bad.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Classic. Let's talk about victimhood for a second. Boy, it isn't fun. Doesn't feel good. There's a lot of emotional indicators for that. And honestly, the common denominator is usually you, right? It's us hurting ourselves. I think, we're inclined sometimes to despair in our difficulties, and it feels not on the subject of just being alone, but like lonely, like no one's helping me, no one. And sometimes it feels like you are looking for someone else to save you, right? We've all had moments like this where we're like, why won't anybody just come to my fucking rescue, please?
Yes.
But the truth is, and this sucks, that it's like, it's us. It's only us that can really, you can go get help. You can do that. I just, where do you start if you're feeling like a victim? You're feeling like no one's helping me. I'm out all here alone. Maybe you don't have any family. Maybe you don't have many friends. How do you even start? I would say, of course, read your book and, listen to interviews with Rob and about happiness, because that's the start. You want to learn how to paint, go watch a YouTube video, and then maybe buy some paints, buy some watercolors, try it out, but go look and listen to the people that have figured out how to be happy or are happier and figured out these tools. But aside from going down that train right now, what are some things where people feeling in that victimhood, like nobody's helped me, I can't do it on my own, I just want to give up, right? Like, what is this all worth? And I don't mean about to commit suicide level, but you know what I'm saying?
Totally. And of course you brought the first, and you know me so well, first place I always lean into as well. I've always been smart enough to know that I'm not very smart, and there are a lot smarter people out there in the world. Let me go find those people. Virtually, YouTube, Google, wherever. And that's always been my go-to. The other piece of it, though, is that I think this is kind of where these two things come in very handy. One is like, I think spirituality is a hard thing to exclude from your life. Even if you don't call it spirituality, it's like there's something in us that's also in everyone else that is hanging the earth on nothing. This idea that the earth you ever think about that? It's like the earth just hangs on nothing. It's like in midair. It's been doing it forever. And like,
well, and what's so funny about that is that I guess I would start to interject here, but and this is sort of proof of like kind of stepping into the unknown. The thing that's holding it together is something we can't even measure, which is dark matter, right? Like we know it's there, but you can't see it. You can't measure it. Yet
Precisely.
We kind of know that's what it's sort of floating in. And without it, who knows?
Oh, yes. Yes. Like just sit one day and contemplate that. And then not just that, like as if that's not enough, that we're all sitting and standing and laying down and sleep on this rock that's hanging in midair, that's, being maintained by dark matter, whatever. It's also spinning, rotating on axis. It's very wobbly. It's not even a perfect sphere. It's wobbling at a really high rate of speed. And then it's also revolving around this super hot star, and it's done it consistently forever, as far as we know. And it's just close enough to this sun to stay warm, but just sort of far enough, or just far enough to not to stay warm, but just close enough to not burn out. It's like crazy, the idea. And now, whatever that intelligence is, whatever that life force or life energy is also beating your heart and breathing your lungs. It's like, what's wild to me is that it's so easy to get lost in the details of our lives and our victimhood story. And really, when the truth is that there's something that we're one with that's much bigger and more brilliant and wiser and more intelligent than us, that is, available for cooperation or collaboration. You can call it anything you want. Some people call it God. You can call it simply the universe. You can call it life itself. But whatever it is, that is just as responsible for your life as you are. And it's just as invested in your life as you are. And so I think sort of coming to some place and some understanding and some kind of experience or practice where you're able to kind of either feel into that or think into that. But I think recognizing that, yes, often we all experience adversity, but on one hand, there's a place to go, are you within yourself, where the answers you're looking for always exist. It's always in there somewhere. And actually, you're seeking it out and from other people you distract yourself and lead yourself away from the one place that actually exists, which is within yourself. But you don't know that until you sort of run out of options outside of you. So there's that. The other piece is, and this comes back to your book, now, I think, we all probably need more confidence and confidence. We need more faith and faith. And by confidence, I often mean self-confidence, but I mean self-confidence with a capital S, which is like whatever it is that we're, one with, that we might call God or source or life, like whatever that is. We need more confidence sort of in that within ourselves. And there's really no substitute for that. And all you have to do is look out into the world, look at all the idiots that are crushing it in different ways. Yeah, it's 100. Not from, right? It's not like they're extraordinarily competent, clearly, or more intelligent than you, or harder working than you. A lot of them don't have better context than you do. It's just that they've had and have more confidence than you, and they have more faith and belief in themselves than you do. And so it's worth, I think, exploring and leaning to that. Of course, that's where folks have to check out a book like yours, Elle, which has been so, incredibly helpful for me. But yeah, there's
well, and on that issue, because you're when you're not, and it's very small stuff, but it's whether it's when you don't speak up, even in small ways, then those breed little mini resentments towards people for not getting what you want, but you never spoke up. It's not that's your fault, right? But then you keep going through and they keep adding up, man. They keep adding up these disappointments, but the disappointments are on you because you had a chance in that moment, or you had a turn to speak up. You didn't. You got to do better next time. That's okay. Not what coulda, shoulda here, but just that is what's so important. I mean, that's why confident people are happier, I think, because they are speaking up for what they want. They're drawing and declaring boundaries. They're saying no to things they don't want to do. And that's going to breed a happier life than, going to the 15th concert and you hate it, but you did it anyway out of guilt because you don't want to disappoint someone or whatever it is,
That's right. You absolutely nailed it. I mean, it can be frustrating. I think we all bump up against people who seem extraordinarily entitled. And, that's its own challenge. But the truth is, I think that the other side of it's probably even worse in a lot of ways, where you think or feel that you don't deserve anything. And to your point, it's like being infinitely wealthy or infinitely rich and just needing to sort of punch your 4-digit ATM code into the machine so you can access all your money. It's like, if you haven't spent enough time, if you spend all your time running around the world and looking at what's going wrong, or complaining about what's going wrong, or not speaking up, great example you use. It's sort of like being extraordinarily wealthy and just never punching your ATM code into the machine. You only get what you ask for. And so you kind of have to, you're right, Elle, it's like, find ways to let your light shine, but it can be really difficult. And I think some of us may have felt like we were born with, at a disadvantage, because maybe we didn't have parents that encouraged us to be confident, or they encouraged us to be just the opposite. And so, yeah, it's a practice, but the practice isn't always to develop more confidence and faith in your competence or your ability or your work ethic alone. There's actual real value in being confident in confidence itself. Like, we know that. We've talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's pretty wild. Like, competence is not, in many life arenas, correlated with success at all. But confidence is.
Oh, and this is the case with when I used to hire people for a living years and years ago, because, and this is true of employers, they would rather hire someone with confidence than someone who's actually skilled in the thing.
Yes.
Because confidence says so much more along with it as a personality trait and character than someone who's actually got the skill. And that's why I tell people, like, you need to develop it whether you like it or not when it comes to getting a job. And also, how are you going to get the job when they ask you, what are your greatest strengths? And you sit there and what? Don't say anything. I mean, at some point you kind of have to jump out of this humble tree and start to,
That's right. And to your point, Elle, confidence, it's interesting to that point. It's like, listen, everything happens through people. Okay. Like in this world, all of it happens through people. And people, for whatever reason, we know this based on science, they read confidence as authenticity, meaning when you're confident, they feel you're being authentic with you, and they therefore can trust you. That's why we call it a confidence man, a con man. That was someone who could, gain your trust and then trick you because they were confident, right? And so that means that, just simply by leaning into confidence alone, And yes, it helps in the beginning. Keep a self-love journal or self-confidence journal where you list things that make you feel good about yourself, that you're proud of, that you love within yourself or appreciate it within yourself. Do that long enough that it becomes a practice and it becomes automatic. But the idea is that if you can build confidence, people will feel you and experience you as more authentic. They will trust you more, and they will give you opportunities and give you, the ability to do things or experience things that you otherwise would never have gotten an opportunity to do, simply because you weren't confident and they didn't trust you, because confidence doesn't read, or a lack of confidence reads as, inauthentic.
Right. And also perhaps incompetent. Even though you could be,
That's
which
right.
is a problem then, because it's incongruent. Maybe you're really skilled, but you are presenting yourself in a certain way, and then no one's buying it. And you're like, no, really, I'm over here. I know what I'm doing. But you have to exude that confidence. Yeah.
And this is especially true and most important for the people who are extraordinarily competent to recognize, right? Because this whole Dunning-Kruger effect is like, the people who are most competent are often the least confident. In other words, the more you know about something, the more you know how much you don't know. It's like if you only lived in one small town your whole life, nothing wrong with that, but say you did, a lot of times you think that you know the whole world, that the whole world is just like your small town. But then you start to travel and you start to realize, oh my goodness, there's a whole world out here. And whereas before I thought I knew the whole world just because I sat in my small little town and wasn't exposed to anything else. As soon as you get out and travel, you start to see how big the world is, and you start to realize, oh, I don't know very much about the world at all, even though I've done all this traveling, right? So the same thing is true with most other spaces. It's like the more competent you become, the more knowledgeable you become, the more talented you become, often the less confident you become, because you know how much you don't know, how much more there is to learn and know.
Right. And then might become insecure about what you do know versus just, it's okay to not know everything. Not everybody who's an expert in a certain arena might be lacking in a few areas of that, or not know everything about it, as both of us, I'm sure, are enlightened by other people talking about you happiness or me confidence. Let's get into dating. You're often on the e-news and, Entertainment Tonight, talking about, speculating about celebrity relations. And I'm always like feeling for you when I see those clips or anything, because they're always asking, you're always so diplomatic about it, but you're basically like, look, this is all speculation. I don't know these people. But you've been dealing in the world of dating for a while, and you're not married. You are a single guy in general out there in the world. Whether in a relationship or not, but you're not married. And so in this arena, what are the things that just come to mind immediately, whether it's objections, lamenting on people's part about why they don't have a relationship or not? Because, I was talking to Arielle Ford recently, and she was saying how, actually the pandemic's the best time to start dating, because people have really gotten a swift kick in the face about what's important in life, what they want, right? This whole scenario we've been through. What are your thoughts on this time for dating? And then just thoughts about dating, things that, people might have in their head. I mean, we know confidence is a part of it. We're looking for people that we like. We don't care if people like us, right? So of course we want to go into dates with that sort of mindset, not, oh, I hope they like me. It's a stranger. But what can we talk about in this arena of dating?
Yeah. First of all, you know me so well, Elle. There's that. And second of all, you just really nailed some of the challenges, I think, and opportunities that folks experience in dating and relationships. I think the one thing that plays out in my mind is like this destination addiction. We experience that in lots of areas in our life, when it comes to money, when it comes to our careers, when it comes to relationships, especially. It's like we're also focused on some future moment when we finally have the relationship we want, and then the marriage we want, the kids we want, and then the kids grow up, and then the retirement we want. That we just have this destination addiction. So what that means is that we're not enjoying the process of dating and relationships nearly in the way that we could or should.
Oh, so good.
Right? It's like people go on dates and they're just so future outcome oriented that they're not present enough to actually enjoy the moment for its own sake. Like every moment should and could and can be enjoyed for its own sake. And the more deeply you can enjoy the moment, no matter who you're with or who you're not with, the more you'll find that the outcomes and the results that you're after begin to prepave themselves. You find that it starts to line up on its own. But even if it didn't, who really cares? If you can just enjoy each moment more deeply and thoroughly and fully and truly, you'd be surprised that a happy life really consists of nothing but that. It's like we get so caught up in creating a happy life or a happy relationship or a happy marriage that we forget it's the happy moments when strung together that make for a happy life or a happy relationship or a happy marriage, right? And so I think increasing our focus on presence and enjoying each moment deeply as though it was the last moment we would ever be given. I mean, no moment is guaranteed. That in of itself would transform and has transformed, I think, so many people's lives. I know it's transformed mine, but also your dating and relationship experience. So that's the one thing I'd say.
And you're learning something. I mean, every date or even a conversation before a date with someone, whether you go out with them or not, let's just say you have a phone. I mean, I'm sure you've had that too. You have a phone conversation with someone. It's nice, but you're like, don't feel the vibe I want to meet. That happens too. But in those moments, in those conversations or real life dates, there's always something that you could learn that you might want or maybe not want, right? There's desires there that you go, oh, wow, I like that aspect of their personality. Like maybe they're not right for me, but I'm going to take that one and put that on my list or, mental list. I don't mean creating a list or checking off, but you know what I'm saying? There's kind of like a Rolodex of qualities and characteristics you're thinking about. I've had that happen to me. I've, been out on dates with lovely people. Maybe there was no chemistry or maybe we really weren't compatible in certain ways, but man, something about a part of their personality that I was so impressed with or admired or hadn't even thought about that I was like, that's something I'd want. I'm so glad that showed up today.
Oh, so poignant. Yes, it's a data gathering experience.
Gathering, yeah.
I've never met anyone in my life who I haven't learned something from. Everyone. I mean, and often the least likely of people in the least likely of situations and circumstances. And so you're absolutely right about that. I think there's incredible value in, sort of like setting an intention early on that you're going to enjoy your dating experience or not do it at all. And one great way to enjoy it is to learn from it, no matter what it presents, right? No matter what surfaces. It's like you can learn from it. And sometimes that learning, and often that learning is a reminder of something maybe you already knew, but it's like incredible how many unkind people remind me how I want to be kind. And I like spending time with kind people. And it makes me cherish and value kind people more. It's like, right? So it doesn't matter if you meet the kind person, enjoy their kindness. If you meet the unkind person, enjoy your own kindness and let it cause you to double down on your own kindness and let it help you appreciate and value other people's kindness even more. So there's really no losing when it comes to dating relationships if you make up your mind for that to be the case.
Now, obviously, you're a natural conversationalist. You're inquisitive and curious like I am. So, I can imagine you're on a date asking lots of questions about the person. And these are natural things. They answer something and you go, oh, hey, what about that? But for the people that are sort of new to this, or again, maybe kind of don't know what to say or have some nerves going on, as much as they try to squash those before a date, are there any sort of like, I don't mean like interview questions, but you know what I mean? Any kind of questions or tips and things like that about what we can ask a potential significant other? Is it something elusive like, hey, what are you looking for in a romantic relationship? Just kind of hearing what they have to say, because based on what they say, we might go, oh, okay. You know what I mean? What are some things maybe that we can ask a date? I don't want to be mechanical about this, right? Like a list of questions, but are there some unique ones you've thought about or things that can maybe take a conversation out of the whole, like, what do you do? Oh, where do you live? The kind of, the interviewee factual stuff and getting into more of the, how to shift that.
Yes. So the first thing I'll say is there's a great podcast out there called The 36 Questions That Lead to Love. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. Lots of articles written about it. It's pretty powerful. It's written by, I think, a psychologist and a therapist, maybe. And it starts off very light, but then over the course of the conversation, and they talk about it in the podcast, the questions get deeper and sort of juicier and juicier until eventually, you get to some real juicy stuff that helps you to not only understand the other person, but also yourself. So I'd say, so check that out. The other thing I'd say is I'm going to share some tips on like what you can do conversationally. But I'd say that one of the mistakes that most of us make is that we ask questions, and it's well-intentioned. We ask questions with intent to understand the other person, so we can see if they check our boxes or meet our needs. But the truth is that we can only get as much clarity as the other person has clarity. And so in other words, not everyone's just as self-aware as they might want to be or as you might want them to be. There's that piece, which is like, so you ask these questions and they just answer based on what they've heard somebody else say or what's top of mind or whatever, and they haven't really thought about it. They don't know themselves that well. There's also this other piece, which is like, on an intellectual level, we often give responses and answers that we do deeply believe, but that we actually don't execute against, right? Like in our real lives, if you look at the way our lives, our dating lives and relationships play out, there's that, but then there's the answers people give you. So for instance, you see this show up in like a lot of self-report assessments. People will say, well, what are you looking for in a partner? And they'll say, oh, someone who's kind and humorous and funny and looks don't matter that much and this and that. And you look at their dating and relationship life and you see that actually they're attracted to people that are the opposite of those things for all kinds of reasons, right? And so just because people tell you something doesn't mean that it's true, first. And second of all, even if it's untrue or not true, it doesn't mean that they are intentionally lying to you. It might mean that's just what they actually believe and feel, but that maybe they have a hard time applying that, or they're not fully bought in, whatever. So there's that. So one of the things I find extraordinarily helpful is like leaning in to how I feel on an energetic level, which I haven't done in the past like the first 20, 30 years of my life. I just never did that really, because I'd be so much in my head and so anxious and nervous about asking the right questions and giving a good impression. But if you can kind of learn to quiet your mind a little, you can ask some questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of questions you can ask, but feel into how you feel in their presence, not just your energy field, but what does it feel like to be in their presence? Do you feel at peace? Do you feel welcomed? Do you feel judged, condemned, or criticized? Do you feel more anxious? Just try to feel into that a little bit, because that's probably more valuable than anything else, is this emotional contagion piece. And now listen, people are anxious and nervous. And so sometimes you'll feel that the first couple of dates, but over time you should feel something, hopefully that feels a little bit more warm and welcoming if it's right for you. So there's that. In terms of the kind of questions you can ask, I'd say the first part is always just to start with personal rapport building. So it's a little bit boring, but just, hey, how are you? How you doing? It's a great place to start. And I think that you can sometimes even, share some kind of compliment or something positive about either what they're wearing or, what they said or how you felt connected to them in some soft way. It doesn't have to be about their looks. I would say steer clear of that, especially I think for a lot of guys. I think sometimes we can.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, like we get it. We know you're even on this date because you think I'm pretty, but can we move on to some other things? Because we're so used to the whole world just focusing on that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, exactly, Elle.
And by the way, then I just want to throw that out there to the guys listening too as well. Not a great opener for online dating apps. Like I've written some stuff. You can comment on that. But to just write like, you have really pretty eyes, or it's a little base, and you kind of want to be like, come on, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, totally. Like you're better off. And I get it, because I think, and, listen, that gets a lot of attention. It's very salient. A beautiful person is very, their physical features are very salient. And, there are other things about them that you also want to take note of. And so you want to go a little deeper. And it doesn't have to start off deep. So something as simple as like, wow, those are great shoes. Now you want to mean it. It's like, those are great shoes. Where the heck do you find those? Are you like, and then you'd be surprised, especially if it's something that's like a personal detail. It doesn't have to be clothes. It can be something as simple as like a particular word they used, or if you notice that the idea essentially is to pay attention. What kinds of things do you hear them saying and doing and presenting to you that you can introduce into the conversation in sort of a relaxed but authentic way and speak to, and then ask them questions about it. And you'd be surprised if you can use this, like I call it a regressive why question, but it doesn't always have to be why in 1,000, in a repetitive way. But let's say they say, oh, this, you mean like this pair of shoes? Yeah, my sister actually bought a pair of shoes. She's a stylist, whatever. And so, oh, that's so interesting. Are you into fashion? Like blah, blah, blah. And then, oh yeah, who's your favorite designer? And what is it about fashion you love so much? Very quickly, you can take a conversation that seems almost shallow or superficial on the surface. And if you can use some of these regressive why questions by framing it in different ways, you can begin to get to the heart of who and what they are and who and what they love, right? Because ultimately where you're wanting to go, I think, is you're wanting to know really what their life is for. What's their life about? What makes them come alive? What energizes them? What drains them? What exhausts them, right? And the idea is to try and stay on the topics that energize them and fill them up and keep them interested, and stay off of the topics that drain them, although that's fine to touch on those things a little too. But the idea is you want to go deeper, I think, by asking open-ended questions and starting with something that is somewhat innocuous, but clearly means something to them because they wore it or they said it or they've done it.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I also too like sometimes just, if it's natural in conversation, just asking people random questions like, hey, you know what? Do you have like a favorite word? Or because that the answer is always very interesting to me on that
Yes.
one. Or, hey, like, what's your favorite comedy? If like you turned it on or it came on, you'd keep it going, and then because you might have some camaraderie, especially if you're in the same generation. And then there's like, oh yeah, and then again, you're like off the factual kind of talk and the boring, like information exchanging. I wonder too, do you have a few more minutes by any chance?
Absolutely. For you,
okay.
Always.
Cool. I don't know. I'm thinking about being on dates, and one of the things I try to do or come into it with is having the vibe of making them feel just comfortable, because I know that if I am coming off in a certain way, I don't know certain people's levels of confidence, you know what I mean? So yes. It's almost like I am going onto stage, I'm not there to perform. I don't mean it that way, but I mean in the, like, if I do have some nerves or I'm really attracted, I still will be like, feel like it's my job. Not that it could be there. I'm not assigning things to genders, but I'm just saying I want to make people feel as comfortable as possible. This is the one thing I wanted to ask, and I'm sure you'd agree with me, but I always find that people who have a rough divorce story, right? A rough like ex story, because like, let's say maybe they have kids with an addict, right? Some kind of like, oh God, no one wants this. Oh God, what are they going to think of me? And I was talking to a guy friend who has had this scenario. He has an ex who was a drug addict, and he had to sort of step up and be like the single dad, and when he started dating again, I was like, you got to get an elevator pitch together ready, because you don't want to simmer in this too long, but we want to say what you got to say about it. If they want to ask more questions, that's great, but like kind of get together your pitch about it versus simmering into the details and how it happened. And now you've spent 20 minutes talking about a very depressing situation of a drug addict who bailed on their kids, right? Like, who wants this conversation? Yeah. So I said, just come up with an elevator pitch. And for him, the truth was something like, well, because people ask like, oh, your ex, were you married? Or these kind of questions come up. And so I just say to people, get together a brief little synopsis that you already have almost kind of rehearsed in a way to get through it and move on it. And also to not kind of stop and waver there. So for him, it was just something, to the effect of like, well, years ago, I got into a relationship. Unbeknownst to me, she was a drug addict. We found that out. Cut to spent many years helping her get sober. I had to be the single dad and I'm the primary caretaker, but we have a really good relationship right now and she's sober and it's all good. Like, just let's wrap it up. Do you know what I mean? And so I'm sure you've heard things like this. For the people out there that may have scenarios like that, other than the one I mentioned, can you think of some elevator pitches for things? Because this is tough for people. You know what I mean?
So yes, you bring up such a great point. So first of all, do what you can to sort of stay out of the past in terms of exes. Yeah. I'd say that's probably the first piece of advice for most people, because most people don't do a good job of talking about their exes in a way that's going to inspire, a positive, uplifting conversation, one that's, that you're going to want to repeat or the other person's going to want to repeat. So that's the first thing. Okay. So second, if you do want or need to bring up the ex because someone's asking you, what was your last relationship like or whatever, it's sort of like, consider it like a job interview. You don't want to talk any trash about your ex, no matter how bad they were.
Yes.
I'm a firm believer in that. Okay. So, and you've got to be authentic about it. Now, they may have done a billion terrible things to you, no question about it, but you've got to find a way to tell the truthful, better feeling story about it. It's got to be authentic, right? So it's not about pasting a smiley sticker on this empty gas tank or this terrible relationship. And so for me, it sounds like, one of the things I've said, in sort of in jest over the course of my life is like, I've dated nothing but brilliant, beautiful, incredible women. I know that's true. That's absolutely true. I feel that completely deep down inside. And some of the relationships were really hard. I won't lie about that. Right now, I haven't said the second part so much. I don't generally share that dating experiences because it's like, sounds like it's going to go down a path and I don't want to invite it to go down a path that's going to be negative. So what I generally say is, look, I have met nothing but incredible, beautiful, brilliant women in my entire life. I've never met, honestly, a woman who wasn't those things. And my exes are no exception to that. And I've learned so much from each and every one of them, things that I didn't expect to learn. And I'm so grateful to each and every one of them. And they were each, personal trainers for unconditional peace and unconditional happiness and unconditional love. And I love them all for that. And I mean that. When I say that, I mean that. Now, that doesn't have to be your elevator pitch.
And that's because that's like more, well, that's a happiness, author, expert. Like,
yeah.
Expect that from you.
That's going to sound a little esoteric. Yes.
Right. And then I would sit there and go, totally understand. But like a lot of people would be like, all right, no, I get you.
Yes. I mean, the other thing, to your point is like, I think that you want to be brief about it. You don't want to be short. So brief is being warm, but
not dismissive
concise.
Of it. Yeah,
that's right. And I'd say the most important part is to, you can share something positive, something you learned about it, and be very succinct, and then lean in to where you're heading now. You're right. So it's a forward looking kind of conversation where it's like, okay, the one thing I've learned over time is that self-love matters, and it matters, and I've committed to being as self-loving as possible. I've realized when I love myself, I'm much better in love in terms of loving other people too. And so I've been reading this book, or I've been doing this thing, and that's where I'm at right now. It's like you move the conversation and you pivot in a direction that helps it stay positive and helps it stay inspiring and encouraging. And you can also throw it back at them and say, hey, is there anything, what would you say is the best thing you've learned over the course of, the last several relationships? Anything that you think has been extraordinarily valuable to you, or it's been a highlight for you, or a lesson learned, or a takeaway that you think if you had to write a book, you'd write a book on, or whatever. Right. So I think part of it too is in injecting a little humor into the conversation.
Yeah. And, sometimes if someone has been divorced and let's say they had kids and they're married, and I'm curious, like, well, why didn't it work out? Right. But instead of sort of attacking them with something like that, I might just be like, hey, hope you don't mind me asking, and just asking for sort of a Cliff Notes version of whatever you're comfortable with. But what would you say would be like the theme around why maybe it didn't work out?
Sometimes people are good.
Yeah, sometimes people are very specific. They're like, oh, well, I walked in on her with my brother. Okay, that's clear. And then sometimes you get a usual, it's like, we got married young. We just kind of like grew up to be different people, and no harm, no foul, and it's all good. And people, again, because it's a little bit less direct, and it's a little bit like, hey, I'm just sort of leaving it open and kind of giving you a chance to gloss over it, right? But you can still pick up a lot in the gloss overs. Okay, so if you... a couple more dating things. These are things I've run into too. I'm sure you've run into. I don't know if you've run into them. All right. So, but for the people out there that have, because this one kills me. I get this one, and it's funny because I never say this comeback, but I kind of want to. When people are like, "Wow, you're so great, and you seem so amazing. Like, why aren't you married?" And you kind of want to be like, well, first of all, it takes two to do that. People don't just pick me out of a cave and decide that I'm their wife.
Yeah.
It's a backhanded compliment. It's a weird thing to get. And then part of me wants to respond with like, more importantly, why are you divorced? You committed to something you couldn't commit to when you have more to explain than I do.
Yes.
That's just me being a smartass, right? But here's the thing. There is that. And, like, for example, it was a real tough one for me, and I don't address it over like text or something, but people have asked me, they're like, oh, you don't have kids, you've never been married. And they're asking it because they're thinking, right? They're like almost suspicious of this is just true. Okay. If you're a woman that's never wanted kids and maybe you haven't been married, they're very suspicious of it. And so, I kind of was like, gosh, how am I going to attack this? But here's the truth is that, when I was 3 years old, I declared to my mother that I didn't want kids. Like, it's in my baby book. She wrote it down. She's like, Elle came to me today and said, that's it. I'm telling you right now, I'm never having kids. Now, here's the crazy thing. A lot of women who don't want kids hate kids. I love them. I worked with them my whole life. In fact, I probably exhausted all of my parenting abilities on raising other people's kids for a long time. And so I love them. But here's also the other truth. Because of that, in my 20s and 30s, listen, every guy I met was confused, Rob. No one knew what the fuck they wanted. Every guy was like, I don't know, maybe someday. I don't think so. But guess what? Every one of my ex-boyfriends has a kid. So we know where that would have gone. I would have been divorced many times. I got married. And I think also it held me back because even though I was 99.99% sure, like since I was 3, you have society going, trust me, you'll see, just wait, or it's selfish, or you'll meet someone and then and I was kind of waiting then to see maybe this would pop up for me where the desire to have would overwhelm this like lifelong, no, thank you. And again, like I'm the kind of person who would go to a party right now. And if there's a bunch of 2-year-olds, oh, I'm hanging out with them. Like I
totally
love
same
kids.
same.
Like I'm the most maternal. I love kids. So it's not about that. And of course, I'd be honored to be a stepmom. But I get that a lot as a woman who hasn't been married and doesn't have kids. And I've always wanted to be married. It's not that. It's just like those decades were rough because it was the kid thing for everybody there. So what are you going through with that? Have you experienced that? What are your thoughts on this? Because it's a tough one.
It is a tough one. And that's why, the real work of dating relationships happens outside the context of dating relationships, right? It's like the first step is to make peace with whatever's happened in your past, and wherever you are in your life today, not only make peace with it, but find real value in it and find a way to really appreciate where you are and why you are where you are, right? And so, like, if you're still struggling with the fact that you're not married, whoever you are out there, or that you don't have kids, or that you're divorced, you're going to be triggered in that conversation, okay, when it's brought up. And so you don't want to be in a position where you're consistently triggered in conversations where people are asking, mostly innocent, non-judgmental questions, hopefully, many cases, less than innocent and often very judgmental questions about why you are or aren't married, or why you do or don't have kids, or why you are or aren't divorced. Right. And so you got to do that work beforehand. Like that's something you have to work out within yourself. And when you've done that, the right words come out more easily and organically and spontaneously. Yeah. And those words generally sound like, so if you haven't done the work, you're not there quite yet. I think, of course, I'm always big on humor, especially in dates, but they'll say, oh, well, you're a dating coach, Rob, you've been on E. How come you're not married?
Oh, yeah. So you get that objection all the time. What's your answer?
I said, I've just been lucky. I don't know how I got so lucky. Sort of joke about that, right? Or I'll say, or I'll be,
that reminds me of Dolly Parton when asked about gay rights. She's like, yeah, why shouldn't they suffer along with the rest of us?
Exactly. Totally. Love that. But it's true. And so that's one. And the other approach I sometimes take is I'll just say, hey, I set out to be a happiness coach. And my heart has really always been on happiness. And I love to love people. And I love relationships. I love being in them. I love not being in them. I love being alone. I love my aloneness. I love my togetherness. And, marriage was never a goal that I set out to achieve. I think what I find a lot more joy in is genuinely loving people. And I think, and for me, it's a little bit of invitation to take a deeper dive into some of my beliefs and the other person's beliefs in a real way. Like, I don't believe we should be prioritizing marriage above love, which is precisely what happens. So many people are in loveless marriages, right? It's like ridiculous. It's like, no, like my commitment is to love. And I prioritize love above marriage. And the only thing I prioritize above love is happiness. Happiness for me is the most important thing and the reason that we want love and the reason we want marriage. And I believe if you really truly love someone, you will love them whether you're married or not, and you will want them to be happy, even if they're with you or not. And so I've set my sights on happiness first and love and sort of marriage down the road. So I'll open that conversation up and say, hey, what do you think about that? Like, do you feel that marriage leads to happiness, or do you feel that marriage or that love can only be contained and expressed within marriage, or not? Like, I'm open to discussing it, like, and not from a biased perspective. I want to be open about it. But I think those kinds of questions can be invaluable because it lets you discover immediately a number of things.
Yes.
First of all, is this person open-minded? Are they, non-judgmental? Are they going to be kind? Can they pivot in the conversation? Are they cognitively agile? Are they emotionally regulated? All these factors for me are just critical. Learn that all the hard way. But it's like, that question is powerful, right? You'll learn all the
cognitively clumsy ass.
Yeah, exactly. It's like only by failing for decades do you ever get any clarity on one or two things here and there, right? But I love those kinds of questions because, quite frankly, I want to go deep in the conversation. I want to talk about these things because they actually matter to me. You're not married, Elle, and I'm not married for very specific reasons. And there's lots of clarity, even for you at 3 years of age. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with marriage, but it means you were very clear from then. And so it's not like an accident that you're not married today. And it's not like a problem.
You mean kids? Sorry, kids.
Or kids. Sorry.
Yeah,
kids,
right. Yeah.
Sorry,
no, but true. It's not an accident. And frankly, I'm so glad that I didn't succumb to societal pressure and conventional construction, social construction, because there are moments when I go, oh my God, like I could have been I could have been sucked into that. And against my own gut, my gut was always like 95+% no from the age of 3. And now I'm at a point where, it doesn't matter. Most people our age have had like their kids or they've married. They really actually at least know what they want now,
Right.
versus dating someone at 27 and them being like, I don't know, maybe someday, I'm not sure. Never. And they have no answer about the kids thing. Whereas now at my age, people are usually like clearer, or they've already had them, or they know whether they want them or not. So then that makes that easier. But yeah, that was an interesting one for a long time.
I just want to highlight one thing there,
Yeah.
Elle, because you just inspired something. And part of, I think, the conversation around dating relationships and just life in general is learning to at least try, if not successfully try, to take everything as a compliment. It's something I started doing like years ago. It's like,
I like that.
Just start taking everything as a compliment. So someone says, why are you divorced? It's like, I got real clear. I was real intentional that we were on different pages. And it was an incredible woman or it was an incredible man. And I decided to go in a different direction. Or if you take it as a compliment, you'd be surprised at how much more cognitively agile you are and how much more agile in the conversation you are and how much more composure and grace you exude immediately, but also how much better you feel and how much more successful you'll be in not just dating, but life itself. I think we live in a time and an age where all of us tend to assume the worst and assume negative intent from everybody at all points in time. And I think that is problematic because it doesn't just ruin the experience you have of the other, but it ruins the experience you have of yourself and of life. And so if you want to improve your dating life and your relationships and just life in general, I think it's important to try and see the positive wherever you can and to take everything or as much as you can as a compliment.
I really, I do like that. And I almost do because part of me is like, well, my personal reason here, just between you and me and the audience and everyone who's listening is I wanted to be married, but I really didn't want to be divorced, and I knew that the people that there was a few choices along the way that were close. And I had a gut feeling that one day it would end up in divorce. Now, I definitely know that probably would be the case. And what I find interesting too, is that a lot of people who have been married, if you dig down and you ask them, you go, hey, if you could go back, were you like sure at the time and in bliss and really thought like this was your love, or do you have doubts? And a lot of people are like, yeah, I kind of knew. And you're like, oh my God, you did it anyway. You did it anyway. You did it anyway. You went against your gut. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not blaming people who are divorced and other. I have friends, lots of people. We've all gotten into these things, but it's sort of interesting because a lot of people almost kind of knew and went against it. And like you said, I'd rather not do something for the sake of something, right? As a social convention or a norm or a check off the list. And I know people who've done that. I've asked people, hey, are you sure you want to marry this person? And I've gotten answers like, well, I think there's greener pastures, but just not for me. Oof, settling, not believing you could do better. One person said to me many years ago, well, who else is going to ask me? And I was like, oh, it's not a good, that didn't work out, by the way, if we're not shocked about that. Yeah. So, but what I love, and I know I've taken up so much of your time, but I love that you
love talking to you, Elle.
I love that you had said that you prioritize happiness above love and love above marriage, but down the line you went there. And, sort of back to where we started with philosophy a little bit. One of my writing clients wrote a book on Epicurean philosophy. It really changed her life. She had gotten disillusioned with Christianity and found that actually Epicurean philosophy solved her anxiety issues and really made her a happier person. But one of the things about Epicurus is he says, you need like these 5 things, like food, shelter, blah, blah, to have happiness. And, we could argue this till the cows come home and people have, but one of the things he says, he doesn't really prioritize love or marriage. He prioritizes friendship. He's like, that's really all you need. You don't need to have, like, you can have sex with anyone. You don't need to have love, romantic partnership to be happy, but you do need the connection with another person.
Oh, Elle, that's
kind of you a little bit. Maybe you are channeling.
Elle, you are incredible and so insightful and so emotionally intelligent. That's precisely it. I think that friendship is the highest form of love. I think that kindness is the highest kind of love. And because it's so pure, and that doesn't mean that it can't also include sex. I'm not saying that. Right. I'm saying there's something about friendship and about sort of kindness that gives of itself for its own sake and not in order to be reciprocated. It's not a quid pro quo kind of experience. Like with your friends, if they're a real friend, you genuinely want them to be happy. Even if it meant them moving across the world, even if it meant them doing something that you wouldn't want for yourself, or that even if it meant them spending more time with someone else, you would be okay with that. In fact, you'd encourage it. It might be hard, you miss them, but you would know that it was the right thing because you love them that much. And I think we could all use a little bit more of that.
It's almost more unconditional, isn't it?
That's right. That's exactly right. It's more conditional. We can all use a little bit more of that in our romantic relationships. And it's profound that you said it in the way that you did, Elle. I mean, literally just finished a book. I think it's going to come out before the beginning of the year, Love from the Inside Out. And it's specifically about that. I mean, so it's pretty incredible that you would say it in the way that you did, Elle. You're always saying just the right thing at just the right time. But I totally agree with you. Friendship is the highest form of love.
You are just every listener's favorite. You're definitely going to come back on because I can't keep you for too long, but I'm going to force you to show up again this year.
I know. It's so painful. So painful talking to you, Elle.
Painful. But on any of the topics we covered or anything that's coming to mind now, even if it's not on the subject of happiness, lasting thoughts here?
Yeah, I would just say, try to enjoy your life more and enjoy it now. I'm a very impatient person. And I think in the beginning of my life, that was very hard. Now it's a very good thing because I don't want to wait until I make more money, I'm healthier, I'm stronger, I'm better looking, I'm married, I have kids, I'm divorced, I'm retired, to start enjoying my life and to be happy. Now is the time to be happy. Don't wait, don't procrastinate, don't hesitate, live now, love now, enjoy now, before it's too late.
Always a pleasure. You're always so wonderful and inspiring and just love your work. Of course, everyone go to coachrobmack.com to learn more about him. We'll put all of the links in the show notes. And of course, his book, Happiness from the Inside Out, on Amazon and everywhere else books are sold. Rob, thanks again. Always so much fun. Always brightens my day. What a fun topic to talk about happiness and the ways in which we can get out of our way.
Yes. You're such a gift. Thanks for the pleasure and privilege of just allowing me to be in the conversation with you, Elle.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. And everyone else, we'll see you next time.
Hey, listeners. Over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.